OMG guys, I have an important update on the Black Dragons, aka our young Polyrachis colony on Eldragon Island. Don't panic, but apparently, they've disappeared. Dear Mother Nature, the great Mater Natura, I've come to you to seek answers, to find help. Yet another of my ant colonies has gone missing. I've been ant keeping for decades, documenting it on YouTube for the past 8 years. But it wasn't until I came to the tropics that I've faced a slew of problems. For the most part, I've been able to find solutions to the crises you've thrown my way. But every now and then, you will pull a fast one on me, which no prior human research could have saved me from. And I'm left mystified. How can I master your rules? What am I missing? What is my missing piece? Will I find it here, halfway across the world, in this Caribbean rainforest? Now I'm in your enclosure, your massive terrarium, to find out how to be a better creator of worlds, a better ant keeper. Please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon. Welcome to the AC family. Enjoy. It's 7 a.m. and raining on the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, in the Atlantic Ocean just northwest of Barbados. It's the rainy season now here in the Caribbean, and I was scheduled for a trek through the rainforest to explore what ants were inhabiting the island. But this week, I had learned from my housekeeper, who takes great care of the ants and creatures of my ant room in Manila while I'm out on excursions like this, that one of my young ant colonies, the Black Dragons, my Polyrachis semi-nermis colony of about 50 workers or so, have disappeared. I've done everything in my power to provide everything I could to give them the resources and space they needed to grow into a fruitful ant colony. What killed me was that I wouldn't be able to get home until 2 weeks from now to check on what happened. So this trip into the heart of the Caribbean jungle was also one of soul-searching for me. In my constant quest to recreate subsets of nature in terrariums and paludariums, I felt perhaps stepping into the greatest paludarium, a real river jungle, might bring me much more insight on how to better reconstruct my vivariums and ant farms, so they thrive much better and undergo less problems. I don't know, call me poetic and cheesy, but I did feel the answers to my issues were somewhere in this jungle. And I wasn't going to leave until I found it. The island of St. Lucia possesses a topography and ecology of stunning beauty, which some say is matched by no other location in the Caribbean. And one of its greatest natural wonders is its enormous national rainforest. As soon as I stepped in, I found myself surrounded by the most intense tropical vegetation I've seen in a very long time. I saw wild pineapples growing from spiny plants in the ground. On my channel, I'm always raving about bromeliads, and it just so happens pineapples are also bromeliads. It was amazing to see such a familiar fruit growing wild in its natural habitat. Similarly, I also spotted wild mango, banana, and even cacao tree pods, containing cocoa beans from which we humans ingeniously discovered one day that we could collect, grind up, and turn into a delicious substance called chocolate. It was just amazing to see these plants and trees growing in the wild, and not on some farm or some corporate-owned plantation or greenhouse of some kind. It was different to see them in this context. I knew I was surrounded by biological purity here. It was then that a movement caught my eye in the leaf litter. It was an ant. Wow! It was an incredible ant. I knew this ant belonged to the genus Camponotus, a carpenter ant of some kind, but it was a species I'd never seen before. She was gorgeous, with her ruby red body and shiny golden gaster. She crawled through the leaf litter like a shiny piece of natural jewelry, and I knew I had to follow it. I had to see its nest. Could you imagine a whole kingdom of these shiny ruby and gold ants? I figured it might take all day to follow it home, but I had all the time and determination in the world. I suddenly felt like a treasure-seeking pirate of the Caribbean. The ant took me down a rather beautiful pathway covered in the most green moss. It was like a natural carpet, fuzzy and soft to the touch, and just so satisfying to look at. Looking closer, I did see some tiny ants foraging around. Again, species unknown. The moss covered even the plants. As you can see here, moss covered this huge bamboo stalk. The bamboo was not dead, it was living, but allowed itself to be covered in this natural carpet. Man, if only I could get my moss to grow this thick and abundant. Now where did our ant go? There's our ant. I continued to follow her. As I walked through the rainforest, I came across a variety of birds and tree anoles. These very cute lizards reminded me of my very first foray into the world of exotic animals. My very first lizard was an anole at the age of 11, and it began my entire fascination with vivariums. I would have never imagined that today, decades later, I'd still be creating vivariums, but on a much larger scale, and with millions watching at that. And then I spotted a trail of ants at the entrance to a nest hole in the soil. Wow! Check out those super majors, AC family! These were likely a species of Phaidole ants, also known as big-headed ants. The sight of the super majors was incredible. It did seem like workers were rushing out of their hole in a fuss. How strange. Following their trail, I discovered why. The ants were bringing back a dead millipede, and a fly, attracted to the smell of the carcass, hung around, perhaps hoping to get a piece of it, or lay its eggs onto it. But the ants clutched onto their prize with determination. As I watched the ants carry their meal home, it made me wonder how many insects or prey items like this millipede these ants brought back to the nest on a daily basis. It had to be a lot, and the variety of insects collected must have been mind-blowing too. I mean, this rainforest had the strangest of insects. Take a look at this interesting looking fly. Its front legs were shorter and sort of waved in the air in front of its body. Was it possibly mimicking an ant? Anyway, I was still determined to find where this ruby and gold ant called home. I continued to follow it through the lush terrain. It did seem like the route back home was quite complex, but it did occur to me that this ant may have been foraging for food and not homeward bound. But I knew that if I continued to follow it, eventually it would head back home. The ant took me through an entanglement of vines, tree branches, plants, and across rotting logs adorned with mushrooms. Mother Nature was truly an artist. Such beauty. I could never match this degree of aesthetics in a terrarium. The variety, driftwood, and microenvironments were just epic. I was taking mental notes. Look at these wild flowers, bird of paradise, wild ginger, and anthurium, the same plant I had planted in the Hacienda del Dorado, Kingdom of the Golden Empire, my colony of yellow crazy ants. I had bought anthurium from a nursery, but it was amazing to see it growing here in its natural habitat. Along the way, I came across some spiders. They looked so fragile, with their wispy legs intact with their cottony webs. They were fascinating to look at. I was reminded of the time I used spiders to try to contain the Fire Nation, my massive fire ant colony, from escaping their paludarium, the Selva de Fuego. I ended up losing the spiders I recruited to build web barriers, but found out my tarantula's webbing, which is actually used to keep ants away in nature, actually did the job. That was one Mother Nature hack I will never forget. In fact, so many things in this rainforest reminded me of the epic and ever-winding journey we the AC family have been through together in the ant room. The snails reminded me of those living in our past and present terrariums. This giant snail in particular was so endearing. And check out that little ant coming to check it out. While looking at these creatures, I did my best to not be noticed. But sometimes, my movements startled them. It reminded me that this time, I was not observing these life forms behind a pane of glass. This time, I was inside with them. This termite nest reminded me of the recent termite hunt that took place in my ant room a couple weeks back. It was an intense scene to witness, but I ended up saving a breeding pair and hoped that one day they would create a nest like this in a terrarium. How could I ever duplicate this habitat though? And perhaps the biggest sighting that took me down memory lane were these ants wandering the leaf litter, Odontomachus, aka trapjaw ants. If you're new to the channel, I had a young Odontomachus colony we named the Jawbreakers, who looked very much like these ants. Before moving into a larger terrarium called the Garden of Eden, sadly, they were annihilated by a colony of wild black crazy ants that broke into their setup. It was my first experience of outside ants killing my inside ants. It was a sad throwback to last year. But when I saw this Odontomachus carrying her dead sister around in search of a suitable place to bury her, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. I think you AC family know why. It was then, AC family, that I entered the creep zone. Following the ruby and gold ant, I was about to discover that not all interactions in this rainforest were beautiful and pleasant. I spotted this. Leaves with odd bumps. It looked a bit horrid. Now, AC family, do you guys know what caused this? Leave your guesses in the comments. The bumps look like sores on the leaves of the plant, swollen and uncomfortable looking. These bumps are caused by an insect, but it may not be what you're thinking. If you said eggs, no, these are not insect eggs. These are actually bites from mosquitoes. Yes, did you know that mosquitoes are actually largely vegetarian? Mosquitoes feed mostly from plant sap. In fact, the only time mosquitoes feed on blood is when they are pregnant, because they need the proteins in the blood to nourish their eggs, which also means only female mosquitoes are bloodsuckers. And only when pregnant, male mosquitoes are 100% vegetarian. The ones who truly should be hating mosquitoes are plants like these. Both male and female mosquitoes drink their sap, and just like humans, the bitten plants produce these bumps as a reaction to the mosquito's saliva. Isn't that interesting? I then spotted this Camponotus ant, which had a strange walk. It didn't seem to be walking quite right. It eventually occurred to me that this worker was most likely sick, and perhaps even infected. AC family, what we were looking at here was an ant whose brain was being controlled from the inside. It was a zombie ant. My guess was that this worker had ingested a spore of the infamous cordyceps fungus and was currently zombified. Oh man! It would soon go on to anchor itself on a branch and provide a bed for the fungus's mushroom to sprout and scatter its spores to go on to infect other unsuspecting ants. Mother Nature truly had a dark and savage side. It reminded me of the time the Golden Empire and even the Tomb Raiders, my captured pharaoh ants, contracted mites. Parasitism is a whole different world that unfortunately we had the experience of witnessing in the Antiverse. After following the ant for several more hours, I spotted an area where more of its kind were crossing. We were near now. I couldn't believe I was still able to follow her to her kingdom, despite all the crazy distractions and sights all around. There was just so much to look at, nooks and crannies to explore, so many smells and sounds. It was amazing that ants living in this kind of labyrinth of seeming randomness were able to find food, water, nest materials, and all things they needed to thrive. In fact, everything in this entire rainforest was taking and providing all at once in a huge plexus of interdependent parts. And at that very moment, as I was brought to the very gates of the Ruby and Gold Ant Kingdom, in a sudden rush, I finally had what I had come for. Mother Nature had answered my plea. Dear Mother Nature, I finally understand. I know why things have happened the way they have. Walking through the rainforest today, being a member of your giant terrarium, I get why crises keep arising in the Antiverse. The problems all along were not the crises. The ant deaths, the failed biological solutions, the infections, the disappearances. The crises were actually your rules playing themselves out perfectly, so that my Antiverse could establish this same natural balance that I see flows through all areas all living and non-living things in this great rainforest matrix. I finally understand that what was wrong was my perspective. In my quest to recreate subsets of your great work in little aquariums, I have failed to realize that I cannot possibly restrict this perfect balance of energy that flows everywhere into a tiny space within 5 panes of glass. The black dragons, my Polyrhacus ants, exist to take and provide within the rainforest they are naturally from. Me taking them out of that grand plexus you've constructed and placing them into a much smaller show space is like removing a gear from a giant clock tower and reworking it into a wristwatch and expecting it to work the same way. In keeping wild ants, it almost repurposes the creatures from being the takers and providers in their natural kingdom and turning them into show animals for human pleasure and learning. But then that would lead one to ask, does that make ant keeping bad? Is it a bastardization of your work? I've thought about this, and my answer to that is no. Through ant keeping, I've been able to discover the brilliance of your work, the complexity, the simplicity, the intensity, the unpredictability, and the tragedy. I've been able to film some of the most epic things and share it with fellow humans on YouTube, millions of whom are drawn to your splendor. People who say they would have never given insects nor the natural world a second thought are now tuning in every week for the opportunity to get a glimpse of your brilliance on screen. Many say they now go out of their way to not kill ants or other insects. I feel keeping ant farms or watching YouTube videos on them, even if sometimes death is involved, is another form of your natural, life-giving balance. Because the result is actually humans wanting to preserve life. Crazy to think that something like YouTube can save nature. But going back to the ant room in 2 weeks, I now know that whether the black dragons are dead, escaped, or found somewhere in the paludarium, it is all part of nature playing itself out perfectly. I now know that I need to be mindful that my little containers of life, my ant farm setups, cannot possibly be disconnected from the outside world, from intruding ants, from mites, poisons, or avenues for escape. Basically, I've discovered today that I can never truly be the master of the worlds I create, as I am a servant in a greater world where all things are taking and providing. Thank you for this realization, which I will treasure with me for the rest of my ant-keeping journey. Love, AntsCanada. Alright AC family, it was a different video this week. I must say, it was incredible walking through the rainforest here in St. Lucia, but it was also quite an introspective one. Next week, I will be in Toronto, Canada, before heading back to Manila, and I hope to go looking for ants there, just like old times. But be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell icon now, so you don't miss out on queen hunting next week, and on what has happened to the black dragons. And hit the like button every single time, including now. Also, if you're new to the channel and want to catch up on all your AntsCanada lore, I've put together a complete storyline playlist so you can watch how all of the ant colonies you love on this channel came to be, all their challenges and hardships, all their successes and life events. Their entire storylines can now be watched from the very start, so you can better appreciate the journey these ants, as well as us watching them, have been embarking on. It's incredible how epic the lives of ants are. Also, just a quick reminder to all those wanting to get into ant keeping, we offer a ton of easy-to-use ant keeping gear and pro ant farms at our shop at AntsCanada.com. We ship worldwide and offer full email customer support if you need it. AC in our colony, I have left a hidden cookie for you here. If you would just like to watch extended play footage of the ruby and gold Camponotus ants. If I lived in St. Lucia, you better believe I'd be keeping them. Try to, anyway. Before we continue with the AC question of the week, I would like to plug my daily vlogging channel, daily vlogs of my travels around the world, which often includes a lot of nature stuff. The vlogs are now following my trip here in St. Lucia, which is truly a tropical paradise. Feel free to watch the vlog and subscribe while you're there. And now it's time for the AC question of the week. Last week we asked, why were these shrimp ideal candidates as new additions to our river world? Congratulations to Beta Gaming, who correctly answered, the glass shrimp were good to add because they clean up the habitat and are a living food source for the fish. Congratulations, Beta Gaming! You just won a free ebook handbook from our shop. In this week's AC question of the week, we ask, what was your favorite creature spotted in this rainforest and why? Leave your answer in the comment section and you could also win a free ebook handbook from our shop. Hope you can subscribe to the channel as we upload every Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video to help us keep making more. It's Ant Love forever.